welcome. I hope you enjoy the museum after the presentation. The mission of the Pavek Museum is to connect generations by sharing stories of history, art, and technology, inspiring innovation through dynamic experiences, and preserving knowledge of the past through historical collections and hand-on education programs. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to invite everyone back for upcoming events. On April 4th, we have Sonic Storytelling, Intro to Beatbox, now at a reduced cost. On May 16th, we have a live performance of the Red-Throated League of Sherlock Holmes' tale, The Adventures of the Crooked Man, featuring live sound effects. On May 28th, we have Crash Course Dim Bulb, where you can build your own dim bulb tester, which is used for a lot of analog technology to make sure you don't electrocute and kill yourself, so it's pretty important. But most importantly, I want to invite everyone to our new event, Challenge Accepted. This will happen on June 20th. We'll have a video game tournament and video game vintage play. So for an hour, people will play different video games. We are asking collectors like Peter to maybe come and display like a little bit what he's going to do later today. And then we'll have a Mario Kart tournament with a cash prize. So registration opens for members on March 25th, and then for everyone else on April 1st. If you want any information about these events and more, there's more on the lobby, and we also have all of this on our website. Okay, I'm excited to present our presenter today. Peter Lundqvist is a collector, independent researcher of video game hardware with a special focus on Medium's formative first decade from 1972 to 1982. A lifelong gamer, he is especially interested in the overlooked systems and early experiences. Early experiences and deep historical threads that are often overlooked in more familiar histories of the medium. Drawn from first-hand experience with original hardware, archival research, and conversations with fellow historians and collectors, he brings a fresh perspective on how today's game world connect to ideas to go back further than most people realize. He is also helping build momentum for the preservation and shared this history with history locally here in Minneapolis. Outside of his work, he is a husband, a father, a data analytics manager, a musician, and a lifelong student of video game history. So thank you so much for presenting today's talk, 50 Years of Console, Computer, and Handhelds, the Convergence of the Steam Deck.
Thank you all for coming here today. Yeah, it's going to be some history for anybody who's familiar with video games. I'm sure you're going to learn new things. For anybody who's not familiar with video games, I'm going to try to cover everything to make it understandable to everyone as well. I'm going to have to be doing some juggling between holding things and holding the microphone and the clicker and everything, but we'll see how we do here. So yeah, welcome 50 years of consoles, computers, and handhelds, all converging in the Steam Deck, which is a combination of all those things in just one device that you can bring with you anywhere. So we'll get into that later here though. So yeah, Felipe already introduced me here, so I think we can move past that part. But the agenda for today is to go through the just introduction, structure of this talk. Then we'll go over a general overview of video game history to get everyone caught up. And then we'll go over consoles first in this section, handhelds here, cartridges, all the ways that games have been distributed and sold and how they're played, and then controllers finally. So the learning objectives here are to recognize that modern gaming ideas have deep historical roots, understand that video game hardware history is not a simple linear progression. There's all these overlapping things that have happened for years and years and years. The Steam Deck being a combination of all these things is something that people have been experimenting with from the very beginning, that have usually just been kind of dismissed as niche ideas or just kind of little experimental things, but really they've been core to it from the start. So then, yeah, developing a broader appreciation for those overlooked systems too, and kind of re-looking at how we look at history here too. So we're at a communications museum, so I also want to talk to you, what is the connection between video games and communication? So if we look at communication as devices interacting, all the way back to 1960 with the very first device here, the Magnavox Odyssey, the original plan for it was to have the graphics broadcast over cable. So you'd be playing Pong or something, but it'd be a real picture of a tennis court or something like that. So they were going to have real graphics at first. It didn't end up working out, but all the way from the start, they've had the idea of devices interacting. If it's people interacting, then all the way back in 1945, they had the first wargaming simulations with Navy over video games and those types of things. So there's people interacting all the way back to then. If it's communities, even in 1972, they had the very first video game tournament. If it's publications, you can go back to people trading code, trading information about video games all the way back to the 70s. If it's broadcasting, they had the first championship in the 80s. And now in the 2020s, there's tournaments with 6+ million viewers. There's daily 30 million people watching different video game streaming sites online. And there's estimated to be 3.3 billion people playing multiplayer gaming today. So a very large part of the entire world here. So connecting it back to myself personally, my history and personal drive with this. In communications, like this is even a picture of my great ×4 grandmother who worked at a printing press in Nebraska. Here's my grandfather who actually here in the cities went to Brown Institute University, I don't know what you call it, Brown something, and started his career in radio that took him all over the country. Him and his wife, my grandma, both worked in music, were journalists, radio broadcasters, all of these things over time. My father too is a pastor, which is very communications related, I would say. My brother actually, when I was talking about those esports, was one of the biggest commentators in that field and did all the huge championships with millions of viewers. Also just, yeah, my wife, a bunch of other people who have worked in broadcast in my family and communications. And so also part of why I'm doing this is because just from religious background, although you can get it from all different things too, just sharing what you have, I just don't want to have a bunch of stuff in my basement to myself, you know, like I see a lot of collectors doing. I want to, no shade at you, Carl. So I want to share everything and educate people and share what I learned, like build up stories of innovation and creativity and all these things are important to me to inspire other people to do the same and see places where people struggled or failed even if it was a great idea and that it can come back around. Also too, I just think this is part of just the American fabric of technology, communication, entertainment, all these things that, you know, you like think of Benjamin Franklin and kind of all those things encapsulated. And so now is the time really for us to talk about video game museums and curations and exhibits and everything. So yeah, because like I mentioned earlier, in the US, gaming includes 70% of consumers at this point. There's a retro gaming boom going on right now with emulators, which basically this one thing that I have in my pocket can play all of these different systems on just a tiny little card that holds all the games, going back to the 70s. And it only costs like $100, so it's very accessible to play all of these systems in just one thing that you can put in your pocket these days, so it's getting more attention. The only video game museums, which I was surprised by when I was looking for people to work with, are on the coast. Like you pretty much just have Texas and New York, California, and that's about all that you have for this country for video game museums. So it'd be good to try and do something locally here too. And history is being researched right now. The very first book about history was written in 1994. All the people who started writing history around this are still accessible today. Like I just messaged a person who's like the father of video game history and they messaged me back. So all these people are accessible, but they're also getting to the age where they're wanting to pass these things on too. So some of the collection comes from people like that I've interacted with too. So they're kind of looking for the next people to pass the baton to in that way. So what is the Steam Deck? What is the focus of this entire conversation? It is a handheld, so yeah, you can hold it, you can play video games that way. It's a console, so you can, in that bottom picture, you can put it on your TV and play with controllers, just like you would have in these consoles. It's also a computer, so in that middle picture, you can see it's just your regular desktop computer. You can have a keyboard on it. You can do, download files, write code, like do whatever you want. It's also a digital ecosystem, so all of your game library is on here. There's a store built right into it. There's social, so you can save your progress of things with different people. There's cloud saving, so you can just jump to your computer or to this, and you can continue right from where your game is. You can also stream to it from your computer, and it's all built on an open source foundation too, so other people can keep building tools onto this as well. So this is kind of a culmination of all of history up to this point in video games and computers and handhelds, and it's just a really good focal point, an example for why all these past things that have been overlooked were actually important ideas. So, a video game history overview. This is the most simplified version of it that I can break down. So I think when I talk with a lot of people, this is kind of what I see. Is people are like, I don't know, there's this thing maybe called Atari from the 70s. And then in the 80s, Mario showed up. And today, like, Mario just looks better. And people play online games like Fortnite. So that's kind of generally how people mostly know video games. But we'll kind of go through a little bit more in depth here. So just general overview here, 1970s, we have the Magnavox Odyssey, the very first console here. And then in 1976, something that's not talked about much that's super important for understanding why Japan eventually jumped ahead in the 80s was there was this association that was formed in Japan for that they could break away from being dependent on anyone for microchips. And so it was a combination between the government, between universities, between businesses to like really jump ahead and own the microchip space. So we'll see more of that later. Then 1977, we get the Atari 2600, which really popularizes video games, sells millions of units, gets it into everybody's homes. At that same time, PC gaming begins to emerge. And in 1979, you start to see the very first game carts exist here. So 70s, there's already a lot of important things going on. So then in the 80s, home computer gaming starts to expand. There's a very important event here, 1983, the North American video game market crashed. So the market became extremely saturated and basically just ended up disappearing overnight. Like everybody saw the success of Atari and was trying to jump into it and just completely blew up the market. And so that event really sets in shape a lot of other things for how people view history and also how Nintendo ends up jumping in here and taking the market after forming that association earlier. So yeah, 1985, then you see the NES pop up. You get Mario, all of that in the US. And also handheld gaming starts, so or becomes more popular with the Game Boy. So here we're gonna watch a quick video on, first we're gonna see the Intellivision, so a system that came out in 1979, and see what that gameplay looks like. Then we're going to see what gameplay looked like in Japan on the most popular system before the Nintendo, and then we'll see what gameplay looks like on the Nintendo after that. So you can see very much how like the US is ahead, Japan is like very much behind at this point, and then how Japan ends up jumping ahead. So. So yeah, this is the Intellivision. It came out in 1979, so you can see there's item storage, there's a whole map you're exploring. They designed these games to be hours long of gameplay, all of this complexity, whereas this is Japan around the same time. So, not really the forerunners that we think of with Nintendo and everything. Nintendo's console at this time was just a Pong, but then here's that jump after that association, just 2 years later. So.
Each Odyssey game.
Okay, so yeah, we can see there that already you can see there's actually a ton of really important development that had happened in the US before Japan kind of came in and became more of the known video game center. So going to the 90s, you see kind of standard console generation start where you get that idea of just graphics get better, and that's basically the idea. You get CD-ROM, so you get actual high quality audio, you get 3D graphics, you have more saving in games, it becomes globally mainstream. The 2000s then, online multiplayer starts to become a central thing. You start to get digital distribution, and kind of these gaming ecosystems start to emerge. And then 2020s, gaming platforms start to span across all these different things, and these different categories that were separate, like, overlap. So now we're going to dive in and actually look at, so each of these different sections, I'm going to start back at the start, 1970s, and we're going to look at all the examples of where there's actually hybrids all along the way. Before the Steam Deck, that this wasn't a new idea, that it wasn't just console. There's all this crossover over time. So if we start here, like I mentioned before, 1972, you have the Magnavox Odyssey, and you have Pong consoles, so all these different consoles where all they did was just pretty much play Pong. And there was 1,000+ consoles made at that time, so there's actually a Pong console market crash as well because it just became extremely oversaturated. And then in 1976 you have, I don't have it with me or here, but you have the Fairchild Channel F, which is the very first one where you could actually have carts. So you could actually switch out the game that you're playing. And it's not just the game that's built into the system. So here we'll look at the Magnavox Odyssey. Another thing I'll say with the Magnavox Odyssey is that it did have these game cards, but they weren't different games. They were just jumpers to change the logic that the game machine was doing. It was very much then too kind of a hybrid between board games and gaming. So you had, playing cards, you had dice, you had poker chips, you had all these things where the device was kind of more just a thing to do the interaction point, but you're still keeping score and everything by hand because the machine's couldn't do it yet. And also graphics, like I mentioned, they wanted them broadcasted, but that didn't work out, so they ended up doing it where you just put these overlays on your TV to do the graphics. So like this one is one for hockey. So you just shove it on your screen and that's your graphics for the game. So we'll see a video of that here. Let me grab our helper. Oh, so can I just exit out? Okay.
Yeah, I think you have to exit out for some reason.
Okay. So yeah, video of the Magnavox Odyssey here.
Uses one of these special game cards, which plug into a slot at the front of the master control unit. The game cards activate lights on your television screen that bounce, float, or extinguish on contact, depending upon the particular game you've chosen to play. For example, to play Odyssey Tennis, you insert game card number 3 into the master unit. This activates 3 lights, 2 representing the players and 1 representing the ball. Press the special tennis game overlay into position on the television screen, and you're ready to begin an exciting, fast-paced tennis game.
All right, so yeah, there's a look at the Magnavox Odyssey. So just like another thing to keep in mind through all this too is that, yeah, all of these physical things that people had to make that have all just been turned into digital over time. So that's like another important thing to keep in mind here too. So then 1972, 77 to 1982, you already immediately see this explosion of hybrid between computer and consoles. So yeah, once again, like the focus of this is how this combines consoles, computers, and handhelds. So the Atari was pretty straightforward. It was mostly just game console, but some very important other things happening here. So you have straightforward computers that can also play games. You have consoles that go into these larger home console, their like computer workstation, and also in their arcade games. So it's kind of a hybrid there too, of like between home and arcade as well. And with this too, is going to end up being half the price of the average home computer too. So this was also too here. We're going to work with Tom DeFanti, who made the GRASS programming language, which was used to do the animation for Star Wars, to have it built right into the system, so you could do home graphics at home equal to Star Wars, like a year or two later. And it had the first menu when you turn it on too, to select your games, like 20, 30 years before you'd have menus in games as well. But due to production delays and problems, the computer unit ended up being put on hold and didn't actually come out, but they still came out with a cart that let you do basic programming on it to access some of these different features on here. And you'd have a little overlay, and you had to do all of your programming using a tiny little keypad and the instructions on this keypad, which seems silly, but also too, yeah, it's like they were really trying to bring all of this power and all of this programming, all of this into this console, and I'll give some examples here of that. So first we're just going to look at a game on the Astrocade, then we're going to look at that Star Wars scene to see kind of what the graphics look like at that time. You can see too that just how long it takes to make the graphics on the Star Wars animation too, and so this short scene in Star Wars, every single frame took 2 minutes to generate and to record and everything like that. So keep that in mind then when you see after that the animation on the Astrocade, that's all pretty much happening in real time. And then you'll see a game that's like made by somebody on the Astrocade as well. So yeah, as you can see here, they're interacting with this menu to start the game. And keep in mind too, this is the same time when there's still Pong machines just existing too. Yeah.
Station is heavily shielded and carries a firepower greater than half the Star.
At painting of the Death Star and created a computer picture by combining a number of circles and arcs.
So yeah, this is just a year or two before how long it's taking just to make one image here. And then this is an animation somebody made on the Astrocade. So not the most amazing thing in the world, but also too, comparing that to that Star Wars scene, that this is all happening in real time and somebody just made it themselves on this device.
What's that called?
This is just an animation on the Astrocade. Yep.
You don't know what year, where it's from?
Oh, that animation, it was called 42. It's from 1980 something, early 80s, yeah. And then this is a game that somebody made on it too. So yeah, we'll go back here. But yeah, those, if you look up like Astrocade animations on YouTube, there's like a whole playlist of them and everything too. So it's really cool to check out because yeah, like once again there, just highlighting that all the way from, this is a year after the Atari comes out and this is getting into people's homes and already people are able to program games, are able to make computer animation almost equal to the movies they're watching. They're able to play games that are arcade quality. And this system largely isn't talked about, but it's doing all of these things at once. One of the reasons some of these things aren't talked about is because they did cost more than other systems at the time. So that makes sense that they weren't always as big of a success, but yeah, still, like, this isn't a fluke. This has been people have been trying to do this from the start. So here, just looking at some sales information around the Astrocade at the same time too. You can see, if you read this, they were looking to produce a home computer, has all the software of a TV game to get into people's homes, but then it was also going to be able to be a computer where you can do business computing, all that kind of stuff. And so you can see them very much talking about, like, this is going to be both people's home computer and home console, and this is like 4 or 5 years before home computing becomes like a huge thing too. So here, we'll just look at gaming on a computer around the same time as well. Just to compare here. So this is what commonly computer gaming would have been looking like at the time too. So pretty much on par with what that person just made themselves on the system. Okay, so after that, we see this hybrid explosion like continue to happen as well. So you have all these different things. You have computers that can play game cartridges. You have consoles that have added on peripherals to make them into computers. And you also have a few like true hybrids. This is one of the only true hybrids. It's called Creative Vision, but I have the Australian variant of it called the Dick Smith Wizard, which is also an entertaining name. But yeah, so here you can see too, like, this is a computer where you're supposed to be doing, you know, the regular computer stuff, but then you pull it out and it's also your controllers. So once again, just more examples of this being an idea that has been a constant rather than an exception. And so, yeah, during this time, IBM, another important thing to note too is that the IBM standard kind of starts, so that's where computers start to become a lot more modular, where you can build a computer to the price point that you want, rather than just being... Nothing. I'm just distracted because I'm thinking of the emoji of your face and I'm laughing now. Okay, so, yeah, then you also get the Commodore 64, so computers become mainstream. People start doing bedroom coding. You have that Creative Vision I showed here. Glico Atom is also an expansion module. The Intellivision is an expansion module. And then the Apple Macintosh eventually ends up coming out and kind of has the modern desktop into mass appeal of, you know, you have Windows, you're expanding things, downsizing things, all that kind of different stuff. And so now we're gonna also look at the Intellivision a little bit in depth here too. So the Intellivision was kind of the same story as the Astrocade here, of we're going to video games provide the best space for home computers. They're friendly, not threatening. So let's use this console to get into everybody's house. And then from there, we'll add on that computer module, and then everybody will have their first home computer. And so, yeah, there's this whole plan, same as Astrocade, of like everybody who has seen this, of like, we could sell a home console for cheap and then have it be people's first home computer. And the Intellivision was impressive too, because not only was it going to be both those things, but it was going to interface with video text, which was like a pre-internet thing where you could go on chat boards and all these types of things. There's also going to be the very first time where you could download games to it, all the way back in 1980. So yeah, it's just a home console, but it was planning to be something that you would do all of your computing with, all of your internet browsing with, like all these different things. But like this one too, that computer module ended up not coming out because of the video game crash. And instead, since they had already promised they were going to sell all these things, they had to make all these crazy extensions to do all of the equivalent of that. So rather than having that sleek keyboard that I showed earlier that you just place this into, you had all these plugins where you keep adding it on. You'd have, where did I put the keyboard? Yeah, you had the keyboard that you'd have to put on separately. There's a whole like music synthesizer you could plug into it to do some music programming and stuff too. So yeah, this one too, it's like there was all these plans, but yeah, it ended up becoming this thing instead. Then after this, so this is where like we really see how most people view video game history, is there's the crash, and Japan steps in, and computers are things that are their own thing, they're programming, you can do all that stuff on it. Consoles are just consoles, they're just plug and play entertainment, like we're gonna keep these two things separate. And so most of video game history looks at it that way of like you have your Nintendo, then you have your Super Nintendo, then you have your N64, you have your Atari line, all that. And it's basically just consoles are consoles and computers are computers. So this is like really the moment where we get how most people view video game history. And everything else is just kind of niche and disregarded. But if you really look at it, even then it's really not happening that way. So this is Sega's very first console, the SG-1000. This is the version that was released in Japan several years before our US one. And you see all these variations happen too. So on the same day that you have the game console come out, you have a computer version of it come out too. You also have upgraded versions of the console that have keyboard plugins that you can do programming on it. And you have all this hybrid variation going on immediately there too, as Sega's like, well, do we just do a game console? What do we do? Do we do the computer thing that everyone else is talking about too? And by the time it gets to the US, all we get is just the game console. So all of that like it isn't really seen in the US. But here too, there's just been this constant line of hybrids all throughout this time. So yeah, SG-1000 with that keyboard. The Famicom you could do a little bit of basic programming on. The Atari actually had a little add-on keyboard where you could do some basic programming. The Dreamcast had a keyboard. I'm not sure if you could actually do programming on it fit, but there was a keyboard add-on. And PlayStation 2 in the 2000s actually had a whole Linux system, so a whole operating system, a whole computer that you could have as a kid. So yeah, here too, like once again, this isn't a niche thing. These hybrids have been going on this entire time. And on the flip side of it, of consoles turning to computers, you have computers turning into consoles. So you had, how I mentioned earlier with IBM, you have it where you can plug in things and it's more modular. There was different game consoles that had boards that you could just plug into your computer, and then you'd have that game console with your computer. So like this is the Sega Mega Drive, also known as Genesis. There's 3DO, there's a few of these different ones where yeah, you just plug into your computer and then you'd have the console and you could play carts. So once again, this hybrid idea isn't new, it's been going on this entire time. So here we get back to more of like the usual history people see of consoles becoming more personal. There's more second TVs in children's bedroom. You start to have your own consoles rather than it being a shared experience with the family. And you start to have game libraries built right into your systems and personal accounts. So, but the important idea here is like you still kind of have that idea of people consolidating in. It's getting smaller, it's getting more personal. It's kind of also kind of going towards that handheld idea here too. And then in 2017 with the Nintendo Switch, you like really see that happen finally then. Of you have something that you can plug into your TV and you can play it on the TV like a regular console like your Atari or whatever. But you can also take it to go and you can just keep playing the exact same game that you're playing as a handheld. But then the really important addition that the Steam Deck has is that computer crossover too. It's not just game console and handheld, it's also a computer. And so looking through all this time, like it's really not just a simple line of game consoles. There's been all this hybrid experimentation going on over time. And we get to the Steam Deck today. Okay, so that's consoles and computer crossovers there. Now we're gonna look at crossovers between consoles and handhelds. So here, the Mattel Auto Race is the very first handheld back in 1976. And it's just kind of some red lights. We'll see that in a second here. And just very simple. But already in 1979, you have the very first handheld with switchable game carts. And so these were the game carts, and you'd slide off the front and you put it on. And it actually has a touchscreen underneath it, so the controls could be different for every single game. There's like little overlay to tell you if like where your score is and stuff like that too. So actually all the way back in 1979, 10 years before the Game Boy, there was already kart gaming. And you also have kind of like how we had Pong machines in consoles where it's just dedicated, it would play one game. You have the same thing with handhelds too, where there's ones that only play one specific game, and the Game & Watch really popularized that and made it a global success as well. So to emphasize the global success here too, so this is a Mickey Mouse game, and in Soviet Russia, they actually had bootlegs of these as well, so this is the exact same game, but they switched out Mario with a cartoon character from Russia, and just kept the exact same thing. But yeah, this is so popular that you start to see bootlegs happening all over the world. Same with, back in the exhibit, I have a Russian version of Famicom too. So yeah, this is where, in the 80s, where it gets really popular and like everybody wants it, no matter what it takes. So here we'll watch some videos of those early handhelds, so to get an idea of those. So here's that Mattel Auto Race. Got it. You try and get to the top, and then you do it again. And then this is that microvision, and you'll see somebody switching out the cart. And we'll wait with this one. So yeah, and then here's an example too of like, same with how there's like 1,000 Pong consoles, like you have just tons and tons of these dedicated handhelds too. And I mean, like even today in like a Happy Meal, you know, you might end up getting one of these at some point. So yeah, these have kind of been a constant. But here then in 1989 to 2003, you get cartridge handhelds, so you get the Game Boy. And then this is kind of the typical history you see usually of like, here's the Game Boy Color, just the advance in graphics there over time. This is about like 11 years difference, I think, or something like that. Hard to look at.
1989? Yep.
Okay, so after that you get kind of these premium handhelds where you're starting to get more towards the Steam Deck too. So you have the DS where there's multiple screens, there's touch input, there's Wi-Fi, there's online multiplayer, there's all these different things going on. There's local chat rooms that you can make. Same with PSP. You can play movies on it, you can play photos on it, you can do some really rough internet browsing with it. You can technically stream to it from your PS3, even though it's very bad and also not great, but also them trying to kind of do that hybrid thing there too. And then you have the upgraded versions of those of the 3DS, which has a 3D screen. When you look at it, it's stereoscopic and you can see 3D. And then you have PS Vita, which is like an upgraded version of the PSP. So this is the interesting part though. So here we are going to look at a ton of crossovers as well between handhelds and consoles way before Steam Deck exists. So going all the way back to 1990. And here's it kind of like cleaned up. So you have all these different kind of things that happen. So you have multimedia expansions, you have things like the TV tuner where you can now watch TV on your handheld. You have consoles getting turned into handhelds, you have handhelds turning into consoles, you have people putting screens on everything to make it kind of portable. And then you eventually get kind of some hybrid experiences leading up to the Wii U. So we'll dig into these here more. But so yeah, first of all the different ideas of people trying to shove antennas onto things to make it multimedia. And then you get already consoles into handhelds. So 1989, the PC Engine is the smallest console ever made, or actually it came out in 1986. But then the same year that the Game Boy came out, Japan actually had this as well, which is just a handheld version of the console all the way back then. So you could play actual console level graphics just in a handheld. And then as well, you also get the Genesis turning into the Nomad. So once again, too, this is just a handheld version of that console. Both of these probably took like 6 or 8 AA's, and they run for like 3 hours and then die if you don't have them plugged in. So yeah, but I mean, people were already doing this back in '89 of turning handhelds and consoles into something that you could switch over. Like you could be playing on your home console at home. Your mom's like, we got to go to soccer practice, and so you take your game, you put it in your handheld, and you just keep playing with the same graphics on the exact same game as you go. And so here we'll look at what the Game Boy looked like versus the Turbo Express the exact same year. So once again, oh no. So yeah, Kirby once again. And then here's like what they were able to do, on this handheld console.
What year was that?
The console came out in 1989 also. Yeah, it came out like 7 months after the Game Boy. So...
And that was a Sega?
So it's made by NEC, so Nippon Electric Company in Japan, and it's the same people, who made the PC Engine. PC Engine in the US was the TurboGrafx 16, and it wasn't really as popular a thing. This is the American version of it. So there was a Turbo Express too, so they did have this come out in the US too, but once again here, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes the success was also just like the premium feature of this. So like this thing was much cheaper than this. I think it was this was maybe like $500, $600 when it came out. So yeah, there too. That's part of the reason for the success. But just that you could have an actual console that you could bring with you. It's not a new idea. It's something going on all the way back to then. You have consoles turning into handhelds. You also have handhelds turning into consoles. So, for example, there was a Super Game Boy where you could take your Game Boy carts and put it in here, put it in your Super Nintendo, and now you're playing your Game Boy on TV. There you're having that crossover in that way. Same with the Game Boy Advance. There was an add-on for the GameCube where you could take your Game Boy Advance games, put it in there, and then you're playing your Game Boy Advance games on the TV. So you see that crossover, not just of handhelds into consoles, but also, consoles into handhelds, but also handhelds into consoles, basically. And then you have all these other hybrid ideas of like, well, maybe we should just put a screen on everything and have it be kind of portable. So once again, the PC Engine, they had this version where you could play it kind of handheld, but you could also like plug in a controller and use it as like a little tiny TV, basically miniaturizing your TV. So here too, all of this generation pretty much had screens you could buy. People putting TVs in their cars where you can play your PS2 or whatever. Screens on PlayStation. This thing was called the Sega Megajet, which was the Mega Drive, but it was just for like business class in Japan, and you could play a handheld then of that. And then also too, you kind of have this early idea too of just putting screens on controllers too. So like you could turn off the TV and keep playing your game on that screen. So like if mom and dad suddenly want to watch TV, you can just like grab your controller and keep playing your console game like kind of handheld, but also you're stuck to the distance of your cord. Once again, just like this idea of hybrids has been around this entire time is the point of all this. So here too, you have more bootlegs of people trying to do the same thing. So just putting a screen on a Dreamcast and calling it a Dreamcast and selling it that way. Or the Famicom making it into a handheld thing, or like this is from 11 years ago or so, or Super Nintendo, and now suddenly you have the Super Nintendo turn into a handheld. There's also like on AliExpress today, bootlegs of like here too is a Dreamcast that somebody just made portable that you can buy for like $500 or something crazy. But then you also have these kind of like hybrid experiences where you could be using your Game Boy Advance as another controller for certain games, or like there'd be games where like elements of it, like there's a Zelda game where you're playing on the TV, but then you'll go inside a building and then you look at your Game Boy Advance and you're like walking around the building in the Game Boy Advance. So there's kind of like this hybrid experience going on between console and handheld. And same with like you start to see with, this is the PS Vita, but also even the PSP, where you could stream from your console to your screen. So like technically you could be, miles away and streaming to your device, even though it was very, very bad when it first came out. It was not ready for it yet, but you could do that all the way back then. And so here, the Wii U in 2012 is where you get super close to this idea of kind of actually having a hybrid experience. So rather than those earlier ones where there's the screens on the controllers and you're limited by that distance, if you're kind of in your same house, you could stream to it, but you're still kind of stuck within that distance. But there is kind of that hybrid crossover here. But just to show how people thought this was pretty exciting, back in 2012, I'll show you a video of somebody who brings this whole thing to a DMV and says, look, I can play my console as a handheld while I'm waiting in line here.
It's just plugged in with no HDMI, no sensor bar. Got the game just plugged in. This is one of the best features. You can pretty much take this anywhere you want. As you can see, I'm not connected to the internet, as you can see by the orange, but it's working. I'm gonna start new Super Mario Brothers.
Okay, so once again, this idea of hybrid has been around this entire time, and people have wanted it, consumers have wanted it. Like that guy was pretty excited, even though he had this entire bag and he was taking up multiple chairs in order to play his console as a handheld at the DMV. But it's real. People have wanted this for years and years and years, all the way back to the 70s, and people have been trying and trying. And so then, like I mentioned earlier, 2017, Nintendo Switch really popularizes and makes a successful version of handheld console into one thing. Then Steam Deck adds that computer element to it. And there's a bunch of other versions of kind of the Steam Deck that people have copied as well. So now we're going to go through the kind of like evolution of game medium, so game cards up to digital distribution today, to kind of like look at the idea of like, everything turning digital and everything being able to be consolidated into one thing. So like I was mentioning earlier of being able to play all of these different systems on just one handheld, on fitting on micro SD card this big. Like all these different games, so just amazing. So if we go back, Magnavox Odyssey, like we saw earlier, they had those playing cards, or those game cards that didn't really have different games on them. They more just kind of like changed how the circuitry was for like what you're interacting with. And you had all of those consoles where the game was just like built into the console and you couldn't play anything else with it. Then in 1976, you get actual game cartridges. So you get the Video Kart 1, very creatively named, with the action adventure where you're fighting the AI to control a battlefield, also known as tic-tac-toe. And you also have just a doodle program where you can draw some pictures on your TV, do some graphics and those types of things. The idea of having like a replaceable game library, like you can take this and bring it to somebody else and plug in the same card, or if your console gets destroyed, you don't lose your entire game because your Pong console gets destroyed. Like you can actually, things are replaceable, interchangeable. 1977, the Atari, really popularizes that. and establishes this as kind of like the economic model of consoles of like you sell the console, but then you sell all of the software to like make more money. And you also see third-party development start. So Activision and Magic were employees at Atari, but at Atari at the time they wouldn't let you put your name in the credits or anything like that, which made developers mad. So they eventually went and started making their own games. Atari tried to sue them, but they won in court to be able to do that. So yeah, Activision is the very first third-party developer, Magic as well. So the idea here of just anybody being able to be a developer and make games that's not controlled by the companies who make the hardware, and yeah, things replaceable. So here you start to see some experiments of game distribution too. You see Homebrew Computer Club in California in the 70s, and they're starting to, like, as soon as computers come out, like 1975 is the year that Microsoft starts as well. And you immediately see all these people with home computing, trading programs like excited to share with each other what they're building and letting others build the same thing just freely, just open source immediately. And then also what's interesting too is that with that Astrocade in 1978, you have an Arcadian newsletter sort of too. So there too, like people on the council side immediately swapping code with each other too, trying to make it for that you can do anything on anything. In 1980, you have the very first subscription-based payment system for games. So over cable, you could just download your game straight to the Intellivision, which is basically what many people do for gaming today, is gaming subscriptions, where like Microsoft has one, Sony has one for PlayStation, all these different people have them, where you just pay a monthly fee and then you can have all these games basically for free. And you have the beginning of homebrewed indie. So yeah, let's watch.
Was that an extra plugin for Intellivision?
Yep, yeah, so there too, yeah, it was like, yeah, I don't have that one here, but that would be an additional one you get to plug in too, called the Play Cable, where, yeah, then over cable, yeah, you could download games straight to it, yeah. Which, yeah, like 40 years before it kind of becomes a standard. So we'll watch a video of that here.
There's lots of video games out today. Some are better than others. But with most games costing $25 or more, the best way to play is without cartridges on Play Cable. For less than half the price of one game, you get 20 great games a month, over $500 worth. And you can play any game, anytime, 24 hours a day. Play Cable. Only a millionaire'd want to play any other way.
The sooner you order, the sooner you'll save. So call your cable company now.
So yeah, so there too, it's like a lot of these ideas have been around for a long, long time. Like people mostly think of gaming subscriptions as something in the last 5-10 years or so, I'd say. But yeah, all the way back then, you could do it with the system that technically came out in 1978. So, you know, within, a year of the Atari coming out, and just 5 years after the Magnavox Odyssey, and 2 years after Microsoft starts, or 3 years after. So yeah, all this has been here from the very start. So here in the late 1970s to 1980s, you have all kinds of different formats of people trying different things. So you have people exchanging those codes with paper tape. You have the magazine typing programs where you're sitting down and copying the code yourself. You have audio cassettes where people, like, you record your game to audio, like data is stored as audio, which a lot of people, I think my age and younger, are like, what? That's a thing that can happen? So yeah, like with that basic programming on the Astrocade as well, this card has an audio in, and so that's how you like load in the game. I can hit play on my computer on an audio file, and it loads into here. And then you have, your typical game cart. You also have floppy disks, which for anybody who's younger than me, looks like this, and it's rewritable storage medium. And you also have an interesting thing happen too of the Intellivision. Yet another thing you could shove into it was a clone of the Atari 2600. So you could just put this into your Intellivision and play any Atari game at all, which Atari tried to sue them for, but Intellivision won because Atari hadn't patented certain things and pretty much used off-the-shelf parts. So yeah, the Intellivision got away with making it that you could just basically steal the Atari. Yeah. which actually is the main way I play Atari games right now while my Atari is at the museum, is I actually play it through my television. Here too, you start to see specialization in the different cartridges. So once again, like PC Engine, they have these cards for their games. Famicom, they start to put like cheaper manufacturing, things becoming smaller, all those different things. You have extra sound chips that they put in here, co-processors sometimes to make graphics look better in different games. Which here too, it's like once again that idea too of like before modern day where like if somebody has an update to a game or something like that, it just downloads to your system. Like all these had to be hardware things that people had to actually like make back then, and you had to own all these different things. So in 1986, you start to see rewritable media. So in Japan, this isn't a thing in the US, but you get the Famicom disk system, which, it's just like little floppy disks. And you could, so they were cheaper to make than cartridges. People could bring in their disks to stores and swap out the game that was on it, so they could just pay, a few dollars or yen or whatever, and swap out Mario for Zelda or something like that. And it just kind of is like, the precursor today too, where it's like, okay, I want to install a new game and I don't have more space, so I'm just going to delete the old game. But they were doing this all the way back in the 80s. This is also too where like you first get saves in games too. So like like Zelda or Metroid or different things like that, when you first got saving, it was actually in this format before you started to have those save batteries and things. The Nintendo carts later. They also had an early kind of like achievement system, so you could fax in like your progress on the games from these discs as well at the kiosk, and you'd like get put in some system for high score, different things like that too. Then in the 80s, you also get the CD-ROM, so there too, you get way larger storage increase, so you start to have actual voice acting. You have video animations, you have CD quality music, all these different things. So we'll watch a video here of PC Engine, full motion video. And once again, this thing came out in 1986, like the same time that like a year after we're getting the Nintendo and Mario, like they're able to have like full animation in Japan on the PC Engine with this CD attachment.
God sent a giant to each of the worlds. His mission was to destroy the worlds. The rulers of each world stopped fighting, cooperated, and chose 2 warriors to stop the giant. Warriors killed the giant and peace returned to the 3 worlds. One of the swords the warriors used.
So it's let's see. So just a year after, we're getting Mario and things. They're having full like animations in their games and voice acting, even though voice acting is very bad. But still, they're doing it. And here too, actually, this is kind of a cool thing too for kind of that console versus portable idea too, is that this whole thing, so you have your PC Engine, it plugs in, you have your CD and it plugs in, and then this actually acts as your memory card, so you save all your games into it, and then it all closes up into a briefcase too, so you can just take it to go as well. So just like really crazy idea kind of too of that console versus portable type of thing too. And so here too, we're gonna look at a example of games coming out at the same time on Nintendo versus this thing of CD, like the audio quality that CDs could bring versus what just the 8-bit systems were doing. So yeah, the introduction of the CD. Whoa, stop playing and television. So yeah, the introduction of the CD was just a massive, massive jump in audio, video, all those different types of things. And so then yeah, you see that continue 90s through 2000s. That basically everything goes to a CD format until we eventually get to start to have digital distribution. So in 1994, once again, you could buy games through cable, the Sega channel, then also you could do satellite downloads. And then you get to this digital storefront, where you can buy everything. Basically, you're just moving away from any kind of physical medium in general, and everything is becoming digital, which makes a lot more of a global indie scene. You have, yeah, everything just being able to be shared across devices. Your entire library is transferable from system to system. Everything becomes digital, which like mostly sounds like a good thing. Like suddenly I can play all these systems on one good thing, on one tiny card. You can do all of these things. But with that is also a change in what it means to own a game. So there's more transferable things, more preservation happening of all these games being digitized. But there's also a change in terms and conditions sometimes then too, of the company is saying like, well, you only own this partly like digital right to it. And if we want to shut off the store, if we want to do whatever, like it can just disappear, and that's just our control to do. So mostly a good thing, but also there's some risks there as well. But yeah, once again, people have been experimenting with downloads, all these different types of distribution, all these different formats, all these different things, and they've all just been consolidated down to just being able to do digital. So here too, like everything just coming to head in what we have today. And then another interesting thing too is, yeah, all those emulators where you can play all these different old systems. You also have flash cartridges, so for these old systems, there's like specialized things where you can play any game off the cart, or like this thing is called the back bit, and with just this one device, I can just switch out. Oh god. I can just switch out the adapter on the end of it and plug it into any of these different systems, and it automatically recognizes which system I'm on, and I can just like navigate the games right on the system and play them that way, which is a huge thing too. So yeah, like there's both going digital, but there's also being able to play all these different games on the original hardware more easily too. And a tangent that I also think is super cool that you don't see in the Steam Deck yet is VR, like games as environment. So like this is one of the things that helped get me back into like retro things. Was this one is called EVVR, and it's like you're in a 90s bedroom, and you have all these consoles then that you can like flip them open, put like physical cards into it, close it, and then you plug it into the CRT and hit play, and you're like in VR doing all of this stuff. And so then you don't actually have to like own all these consoles or anything, but you kind of get that experience. And like some of that was like, oh man, yeah, this is what it felt like. Like, yeah, so yeah, games as an environment. Same with here too. This isn't a real arcade, this is a VR arcade where like I can walk around to all the different systems and play arcade games like and hear all the other games going off around me as if I'm in that actual space too. Okay, now we're on the last section, so we're almost there, everyone. So control evolution too. So the final thing with the Steam Deck here is that it's also a controller built right into it too, which is important too in being the handheld aspect and all that. So we're gonna look through controllers here. So at the very start, before there was a standardized controller, there was the Magnavox Odyssey, very first controller here, and kind of all these different Palm consoles where, as I described it to my brother the other day, basically the idea was like anything you've ever turned a light switch on or off with, it's like what you're gonna interact with. So it's like dials, switches, sliders, all those types of things. Like basically what they were saying in the real world mechanically is what they used as controls. And yeah, basically, and you have these like things that you just hold in your hand. Then you get the joystick, which kind of becomes the first standard. With Atari, you see all kinds of controls kind of imitating what you'd see at carnival games before that. So guns, wheels, balls, like all those different types of things. You start to have light guns. You have, the computer mouse coming in. you have all these different systems that have keypads. So like I mentioned, the Astrocade having a keypad on it. Also the Intellivision having a keypad on it. Where you put on these different overlays too, and they tell you what buttons to hit for what games, since there's no standardization at that point. And then you also have in 1982, an important thing happened of the Donkey Kong Nintendo Game & Watch, which is the very first time you ever have this D-pad, which becomes standard on basically like everything else after that as the main control. But yeah, it just started out as a cheap little handheld. This is the first time you see it. Then 82, Vectrex has the first analog joystick, so rather than just 4 directions or 8 directions that you're doing, it can go full 360 all over the place. You have all those keyboards I showed in that earlier slide. And then in 1983, you have the Famicom controller, which this becomes the standard gamepad basically since then. So rather than joystick, you have something you hold in both hands. You have action buttons. You have that D-pad that we saw earlier. And this becomes the standard. And to show how much of a jump that was in people's, like in the zeitgeist, in people's minds, this is what Sega did at the same time. So the exact same day, Nintendo's first mainstream console, the Famicom, comes out, and Sega's first console, the SG-1000, comes out in Japan in July 1983. And Nintendo comes out with this console that changes the world, or this controller, and Sega comes out with this controller. not quite up to par. And so you see them over the next 5 years make version after version after version to try and catch up with the just Nintendo gamepad. So Nintendo makes basically one version, they make 5 or 6 different versions just to catch up. So that's how big of a jump it was, just mentally in that change. And even here, Sega had these little thumbsticks that you could screw in to try and have still your tiny little joystick. They weren't ready to let go of the joystick. So yeah, all these ideas. And then here, from 80s through 90s, you basically just have things become more ergonomic, more and more buttons added to everything. You have analog joysticks become more standard, all these types of things, rumble. Then 2000s through the present, you have touchscreen gameplay show up, you have motion gameplay where you're using the actual body, same with here too. You have all these different rhythm controller peripherals show up. You have your phones and tablets getting people used to touchscreens as well. In 2013, you get the Xbox One controller, which is the standard today. Basically, this has been the controller that people have used for the last 13 years consistently as the main controller. So yeah, previously that Nintendo one, but yeah, now this is kind of people are we're good with this, let's just work with this. Every game is kind of designed around it. Jump in games is pretty standardized of I know I'm going to hit A to jump. Things have become much more consistent with controls. And then with the Steam Deck, then you basically see that Xbox controller shoved onto here. So you have the exact same layout, but just as this. But along with that, you also see, this also has a touchscreen. So you can do all the things that people are used to with phones and tablets and things now. It also has gyro in it, so you have that motion control. It has trackpads on it, these things that act like mouses. So you see combination of things that you see in motion control and handhelds and computers, all these different things put into one device here. But yeah, people have been trying to figure this out since the 70s here. And so here, I bad talked Sega earlier, but secretly they actually had an influence on what became the standard controller here. So there was this controller that was made in 1989 for the Mega Drive. And it was for just a few flying games and things like that. But it had an analog joystick like this. It had some buttons, it had this general shape. There was L and R buttons and shoulder buttons on it, like you have here. Then in 96, you see that kind of get more defined into the Sega Saturn controller, an analog one that they had as an alternative. Then in 98, you see the Dreamcast controller, which is further refinement of that. You have this thing where you could put in memory cards that had little screens on them. And then you have the Xbox controller in 2001, the Duke controller, which, yes, Microsoft had been working with Dreamcast, or with Sony on the Dreamcast, but then when it failed, there was some crossover of employees and ideas there that happened, and so yeah, that became this. there's actually some really early prototype drawings of the Xbox controller with a VMU where you put it in here, and actually behind here there's still 2 memory card slots on top, just like the Dreamcast. And you see this further refined into here. So Sega had done that initial catch-up, but really then later on they had a pretty big influence on like what we have as the standard controller today. So that's another interesting thing most people don't know. And so the future, like one of the things, I don't know what's gonna happen, but one of the things I see as another like consistent thing throughout all of time that hasn't been integrated into this is 3D and VR. So once again, the Vectrex thing. This actually had a 3D glasses all the way back in 1984. And the way it worked is it had a spinning disc with color on it. And it would time with like the gameplay, like it would have a timing thing on it for that would color different elements of the gameplay. So like not only was it 3D, but you'd see like your spaceship flying around. It would be one color versus other things going on, that kind of stuff. So it's crazy. But then you also have Famicom had 3D glasses. The Sega's console also had 3D glasses. In 1995, you get the Virtual Boy. You get the 3DS, which has 3D graphics, even though it's not glasses you're wearing. It's like a screen that you can see 3D in. You have PlayStation VR, you have the Quest headset line. There's this thing called the Looking Glass, where like you can see pictures in 3D. Apple has a headset. Meta's making these like glasses to try and make it more accessible, where you can see different AR and VR and that kind of thing. So this is another one of those things where like I've seen that has happened throughout all of time, but still hasn't been integrated into this. So this is another one of those paths to kind of like look out for. But otherwise, does anybody else have any ideas of like things that they haven't seen integrated into like this yet for the future?
Smells.
What was that?
Smells.
But yeah, so that's one huge line that I haven't seen integrated into these things, and I think that might be something to look out for here. But otherwise, always something interesting to think about. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. And here's some resources too if people want to look up anything later for more history and stuff too.
Questions?
We open the floor to questions.
Yep, I did have a question. So earlier when you mentioned about like digital stores and storefronts and stuff, I thought the Sega channel, I thought that was the very first one technically, the Sega innovation where you could, not like cable exactly, but you could download games to your Genesis or like whatever. So I thought when you mentioned one before that, I thought Sega was the very first one. I was just curious if you knew about that.
Yeah, so yeah, the comment is on when I mentioned the television play cable of being able to download games, and then there's something in the 90s called Sega Channel that had that in 94. So yeah.
I didn't.
Oh yeah, I went through some of this quick because I was like, I think I'm losing people. So yeah. Sega Channel, like there too, it's like another thing where this first 10 years of American history and video games is just mostly ignored and forgotten, and there's all these massive things that happened that they tried out pretty much every idea you see today in those first 10 years, and like nobody knows about it. Like I didn't know about it until I started getting into this, so that's like one of the most important things I like to like talk about and share with people is that like we talk about Japan and Nintendo and everything, but actually there was like all this deep history that happened like right here in America that like we don't even know about. And so yeah, then Sega Channel came later. And yeah, so Teleview is actually kind of cool too, that you have a little city to navigate between different things that you're interacting with.
Do you know if there's ever been another time where the industry has faced like a parts shortage like we're facing today with memory and storage, and how that affected them and how they got over it? Because that will dictate what we do in the future, big time, right?
Yeah, so in, like when I mentioned with these Pong consoles, there's actually a shortage there of basically like, yeah, they invented like this Pong in a chip, and somebody's like, we're just gonna buy a million of these and put them in all kinds of systems. So Coleco actually jumped in there right away and bought a ton of them, and there eventually ended up being a shortage, and part of the reason Coleco survived is because they had bought this like mass of them before anybody else was doing it, and so they were able to make all these Pong consoles while everything failed. But as for like how they recovered for that? That's a good idea. That's a good question. I actually don't know how they bounced back from that exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that is something to look up because as you mentioned, today there's like skyrocketing prices in RAM and all these different parts as well because of the AI craze, which is making shortages and raising prices and making everything harder. I'm kind of wondering how the switch to Nintendo's latest console is going to be because it wasn't super innovative, and now they're running into all these challenges of tariffs and increasing prices on hardware and all those types of things. So yeah, I'm curious to see how Nintendo does at the moment. But yeah, I don't know how they recovered from it though. That's a good question. Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? Do you have any favorite VR games you think are going to change the world?
I have a lot of favorite games. I think this is the expert on VR right here, but I think the issue of VR isn't like the quality of the game so much. Like there's tons of games if you're able to do and everything, but the issue more of people right now is VR sickness. So just the and price too. But there's people who like when they're playing in VR they get sick because of just their like mind and their frame rate and everything. But they're like, as I'm seeing resolution increase on these headsets and as I'm seeing frame rates increase, I think that's going to be less of a thing. Like when I wear the newest headset versus like the first ones I tried, like I don't feel the sickness at all anymore. But granted, like the headset I have now is like $1,000, so it's not like everybody's going to have it. So yeah, but otherwise specific games. There's a few games called Vertigo 1 and 2 that are really cool. There's, like I mentioned, those VR arcades and those types of things are really cool ideas. There's also things too that will turn like, people have made like Nintendo games into like 3D games, like the original ones, you can play those in VR and 3D. There's all the chat room things like VR chat, even though it's like a little bit of a weird spot, but like it's a new way for communities to happen that I think is very important. Same with like my brothers, like we live all over the world, and so sometimes when we hang out, we'll play games in VR because it feels like actually being in a space with someone. Like instead of like a phone call, you know, where you need to just like stare directly at each other on a work call where you're just staring at someone, like that's not how you interact with people. Like you go on a walk and you like look at everything around you and you like talk about what's happening and you have an experience together. You don't just stare at each other's faces an inch away from each other. So VR, I think, is the only step into like being able to do that. Like we'll play mini golf and we'll just be like, you know, 10 feet away from each other doing whatever, but like having a conversation and like talking about things we're seeing in the world and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think some of those social elements are important too in communities.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. We have a little gift. And we're going to have some gameplay after the talk, so hang around. And thank you so much for coming here to the Pavek.
Yeah.